Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're talking about a domino effect. How a single gunshot in a European city could somehow pull the entire world into a catastrophic war. We're going to untangle that incredibly complex web of treaties and secret promises. So how on earth did it all happen?
And really, that's the core question, isn't it? How did one assassination in Sarajevo, back in June 1914, manage to ignite a global war? We all know the story of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. That's the famous spark. But here's the thing about sparks. They're pretty useless unless there's a whole lot of fuel just lying around waiting to catch fire. So what was that fuel?
Well, the answer isn't really in the spark itself. It's in all of these dominoes that had been carefully lined up for the last 25 years. They were just waiting for a single push, this fuel. It was an incredibly rigid system of alliances. For decades, the great powers of Europe had essentially been picking teams, creating this dangerous situation where a small fight between two countries could automatically drag everybody else.
To really get how these dominoes got set up in the first place, we have to go back a bit. We need to meet the architect of this whole system, a man named Otto von Bismarck. He was the German chancellor, and for a good while he was basically the master puppeteer of Europe, pulling all the strings to build a network designed for one thing: to keep Germany safe.
Bismarck's system was a serious balancing act. It was incredibly complex, and it was all driven by one massive fear he had: a two-front war. He was terrified of getting caught in a war with France on one side and Russia on the other, so he creates the dual alliance with Austria-Hungary against Russia. Then he adds Italy, creating the Triple Alliance. But, and this is where you can see his genius, at the same time he signed a secret pact with Russia, the Reinsurance Treaty, that basically ensured they'd stay neutral if France attacked Germany. It was a masterpiece of balancing rival interests.
But here's the catch. This whole delicate balance, it pretty much depended entirely on Bismarck being the one in charge. Then, in 1890, everything changes. The new German Kaiser, Wilhelm II, comes along and he fires him. Just dismisses him. And this wasn't just a personnel change. This was a radical, world-altering shift in German foreign policy. And the contrast between these two men could not be more stark. Bismarck's whole approach was cautious. His main goal was to keep Europe stable and prevent war. Wilhelm II, on the other hand, was ambitious and aggressive. He wanted a global empire for Germany, what he called a place in the sun, and he was dead set on building a navy that could rival Great Britain's. He was absolutely ready to rock the boat.
So, one of the first things Wilhelm does is he lets that secret treaty with Russia just expire. He just lets it go. This was a catastrophic mistake. Suddenly, Russia feels isolated, nervous, and it starts looking around for a new friend. And who's waiting there with open arms? France. They're still bitter about losing territory to Germany in 1871, and they are desperate to break out of their own isolation. You can almost hear the first dominoes starting to wobble. This one move leads directly to Europe splitting itself right down the middle into two huge opposing camps. These two blocks would define the continent for the next couple of decades. On one side, you had the established alliance. On the other, a new understanding, an entente.
Okay, so on one side, you had the Triple Alliance. This was a formal, ironclad military pact. At its core were Germany and Austria-Hungary. Italy joined them later, forming this powerful bloc of central powers. And their agreement was simple and binding. An attack on one is an attack on all.
But there was a weak link in that chain, and it was Italy. Italy's commitment to this whole thing was, let's just say, always a bit shaky. They had their own rivalries with Austria-Hungary over territory, and they were even making secret deals with France on the side. This uncertainty would end up being critical when war actually broke out, because Italy, as you might know, eventually switched sides.
Now, the opposing camp, the Triple Entente, didn't just appear overnight. It was pieced together bit by bit over more than a decade. First, in 1894, France and Russia officially allied. Just like that, Bismarck's greatest nightmare, a two-front threat for Germany, was a reality. Then, in 1904, something pretty remarkable happened. Great Britain and France, enemies for centuries, buried the hatchet with the Entente Cordiale. And the final piece clicked into place in 1907, when Britain and Russia settled their own long-running rivalry. The triangle was complete.
And this is a really
crucial point. The Triple Entente was different. It wasn't a formal military pact like the Triple Alliance. It was more of a series of understandings, a moral obligation to support each other if a crisis hit. But you have to remember the paranoid atmosphere of the time. To Germany, this looser agreement looked just as threatening as an ironclad treaty.
So, with these two camps now firmly in place, it didn't take long for them to get tested. Germany decided to challenge this new friendship between Britain and France by trying to interfere with French influence in Morocco. And they didn't just try it once, they tried it twice.
And the move completely backfired. Germany's challenges only succeeded in pushing Britain and France even closer together. Instead of shattering the Entente, these crises actually solidified it. All it really did was make Germany look like a bully and deepen its own diplomatic isolation.
So, if Morocco was a test for the Entente, the Bosnian crisis was a huge test for the alliance. And this one was way more dangerous because it took place in what everyone called the powder keg of Europe, the Balkans. Austria-Hungary decided to just formally annex the territory of Bosnia, which absolutely infuriated nearby Serbia and its powerful ally, Russia. This time, the alliance system worked exactly as planned. Well, for one side anyway. Germany gave Austria-Hungary its full support, basically a blank check. Russia, still weak from a recent war, had no choice but to back down. It was a massive public humiliation, and Russia quietly vowed that this would never, ever happen again. You can see how that set a really dangerous precedent for 1914.
And that brings us right back to Sarajevo. With these alliances hardened, with all this resentment simmering, the stage was set. The assassination of the Archduke wasn't just a murder anymore. It was the tiny push that finally toppled that first domino.
By 1914, it all came down to a simple number: 2. Europe wasn't a continent of individual nations anymore. It was 2 hostile, heavily armed camps. The complex web of diplomacy was gone, replaced by a simple, terrifying binary. There was just no middle ground left. And now, watch the dominoes fall. It's a breathtakingly fast chain reaction. Austria, backed by Germany, moves on Serbia. Russia, vowing not to be humiliated again, mobilizes to protect Serbia. Germany sees mobilization as an act of war, so it declares war on Russia, and then on Russia's ally, France. To get to France, Germany invades neutral Belgium, and that final act triggers Britain's entry into the war. In just a few weeks, a local crisis had become a world war.
So this was the standoff. 2 opposing blocs. The Triple Alliance, a formal, rigid military pact, and the Triple Entente, a looser but still incredibly powerful commitment born from a shared fear of Germany. In the end, the very agreements that were supposed to create security were what made a huge war almost inevitable.
The alliances transformed a regional crisis into a world war. Just think about that for a second. The very systems designed to deter a conflict actually guaranteed it. They took away all flexibility, creating this rigid logic where escalation was automatic. To honor your commitment meant you had to go to war. It was that simple.
And that leaves us with a really critical question for our own time. The story of 1914 shows us that alliances, things meant to keep the peace, can sometimes be the very thing that guarantees a war. So what does that mean for how nations should pursue safety and security in the 21st century? It's definitely something to think about. Thanks for watching The Explainer.